We are live.
So,
I love that the countdown. I said, I'm really pleased the countdown has reset itself and now works in the right time scale.
I don't know why. It's just suddenly decided that it respects.
It's correct now.
We've shifted into another universe where time actually behaves the way that we expect it to, and
we've made time a linear concept. Well done. Also, just before it actually loads up, the issue last week with this not appearing on the podcast feed is that it decided to not save in the back end of StreamYard.
Oh no.
So when I backed out, there was nothing there. But it's all on YouTube, so you can go watch it on YouTube if you really wanted to catch it up. It's on YouTube. It's on Twitch. It's everywhere you want to be. But for now, hello everybody, and welcome to another edition of The Extra Shift. I'm Chris here as always with Brendan. How are we going?
Not too bad. It's been a busy day, but we got there in the end, and I'm excited to talk these playoff matchups that everyone expected would happen, and
completely
hasn't at all broken anyone's brackets very early on.
No, my bracket was dead a while ago, but my bracket
was dead the first round. I can't complain.
My bracket is completely toast. The only thing I've let me work out what I called correctly. I did call Vegas beating Edmonton correctly. That was a correct call.
Oh yeah, I need to look back at our predictions from last episode because I think I did as well.
No, that's it. That's all I've got. Oh, and I got Carolina making it. Did I get Carolina making it? No, I didn't get Carolina making it this far because I had them losing to the Rangers. I literally called one series in the second round correct. That's it.
I actually did. I actually got 3 right. We'll get back to it, but it is.
Well, our predictions we'll talk about. Yeah.
It is back to. Well, I mean, for this round, not for the whole playoffs. I totally fucked it up. But anyway, it is episode 189. So welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us. Of course, the great number of the lesser
San Jose Sharks legend Barclay Goodrow.
Yes, that's it. The lesser, the cheer squad Robertson at this stage of the playoffs.
It's noted defenseman Nick Robertson.
Yeah, that's right.
Noted defenseman. That's a joke for the Dangle listeners out there. I when I was looking down the list of the names, and again, I always look for the interesting ones, and McGillney's obviously there. But for me, it's I didn't realize that Andreas Athanasiou wore it for Chicago because I forgot he was playing. Like I legitimately forgot he played last season, like this season.
Yeah,
I forgot.
There's a few people, honestly, I think that Sam Gagner is the most prolific on there that I had no concept was still in the league. I just had no idea. I thought Sam. If you asked me, gun to my head, I would have said Sam Gagner retired about 5 years ago.
I literally only know one person who would have known that Sam Gagner is still playing, and how you going, Shannon? Anyway, so literally it though. Probably, and even then, probably 50-50 depending on ice time. So let's get into the episode. There is a fair bit to get through, and we'd like to get through it fairly fast. Let's start with the darkest timeline. So I did a live stream, which went really well. Thank you everyone, by the way, for joining that live stream. That went really well. There were a lot of people on. We are in the worst timeline. Chicago win the draft lottery and therefore have the right to draft Connor Bedard. Now, the good news, there is good news out of this, everybody, which is San Jose didn't fall and we're picking 4th. So look out to see, do we pick a guaranteed center that's going to come to the league, or do we go for a possibly generational level winger who might not turn up in the league for 4 years? Let's find out together, shall we? But the bad news about this, and there's lots of bad news about this, is that in the first couple of hours, they made $2.3 million in season ticket sales, which wipes out the $2.1 million fine that they received over the whole covering up sexual abuse thing.
It's shocking, honestly. I'd forgotten that was the only punishment really they got. Because of the fact that the majority of people that were involved with it had like moved on to other teams or whatever. Like, there are people that lost their jobs over it or whatever, but some of them weren't even working for the Blackhawks at that point in time. So you couldn't really say that that's a disincentive to the Blackhawks.
No.
And they retained their first round pick.
The Florida Panthers paid quite heavily.
It's nuts. Like, honestly, the upshot of all of this, because so many teams in the NHL have been punished in the past, like by losing it. Like Arizona just in the last couple of years lost a first round pick for doing like extra testing on players before the draft. The Devils lost a pick for like legally signing a bad contract.
They signed a player to what was at the time a legal contract. Yeah. The league decided that it was cap circumvention and punished them by a first-round pick. Cap circumvention, a bigger offense than sexual assault. So it feels wrong that Chicago are going to get Bedard. And as I've sort of said, it's not necessarily against like Chicago fans, etc. But the organization has learned absolutely nothing out of this. And like Rocky Wirtz is just loving it. Absolutely loving it. He put his fingers up at the league, he thumbed his nose at everybody, and he gets away with it and gets another generational talent. So, we'll see what happens.
It's interesting timing too in terms of like to step away from all of that kind of talk, which we've talked about before or whatever, from the Blackhawks. Like, they've already made it clear that they're walking away from Jonathan Taves and potentially probably Patrick Kane, I would imagine, at this point in his career. It's really like just an immediate fresh slate for them to clear out those guys and start fresh with
Seth Jones.
Seth Jones is still on the contract for like 7 more years or something like that. But I mean, look, honestly, it's huge for Seth Jones. Seth Jones must be fucking partying at finding out that suddenly they've got this, generational talent that's going to turn their team around.
I mean, probably that feels like a Seth Jones thing to do. So obviously, Chicago are first, Anaheim second, Columbus is third, San Jose is fourth, then Montreal, Arizona, Philadelphia, and Washington. So the only move was between 1 and 2. Look, from a San Jose perspective, I'm happy we didn't slide. I was anticipating a slide to like 6th, which is the furthest we could have dropped. It was really weird. San Jose could have drafted 1st, 2nd, 4th, 5th, or 6th. That was our options. So
I'm actually at this point in time disappointed that the Penguins didn't drop out like way earlier, because like the highest I think we could get was like 8th or something, and it was just not gonna, it was just like, I kind of just wanted the chaos of finishing like 16th or whatever, 17th, 18th or whatever, and drafting it.
There's also a question about, is there a chance that Bedard doesn't sign? I would say no. Thinking about the last time that really happened and how it went for that player in terms of reputation, what the hockey men had to say about it, I would suspect that there will be some heavy leaning on from the league to make sure that he's definitely going to go where they tell him to go. And look, this is, and I don't believe there are people who are going to go, it was rigged, and it was not rigged, but it is the outcome the league wanted, because they get Bedard in the largest of the markets that were available really to Bedard. So outside of Montreal, and if it was Montreal, everyone would have lost their shit. I think the worst outcome for everybody else, but the best outcome media-wise for the league, was Chicago, and they got what they wanted. Like, they didn't want to see Connor Bedard in San Jose or Anaheim. They might have been okay in Arizona because, pushing that idea of Arizona, but again, he would have been playing in front of less people. He would have been coming up to the NHL to play in front of a smaller crowd at home. So
yeah, look, I mean, it's a great outcome in terms of the league, in terms of markets, for sure. Like, Chicago's a huge market, an important venue, all that kind of stuff. It's and look, honestly, it's not a shock in the regard that, like, Chicago were fucking terrible the entire year, and I don't know if you did, but I picked that they would get first overall at the start of the season. I imagine a lot of people did, because they were on paper going to be just.
I picked us simply because I wanted it to happen. But the other thing is too, Gary Bettman has spent a lot of time talking about the fact that nobody deliberately tanks. And the team that openly tanked won the lottery. So, Anaheim were not expecting to be that bad. San Jose were expecting to be bad, but not that bad. Everyone else was kind of accidentally terrible.
Yeah.
Columbus were expecting to make the playoffs. So,
that's true. Yeah, that's true. Obviously things went pretty badly for some teams.
The team that actively tried to tank got rewarded by getting first overall. And I don't have a problem with that. I do have a problem with the league pretending it's not a thing.
Yeah, that's true.
You can't pretend.
Shannon's asking, is there any chance that...
That's what we said, and it's like he's not going to...
I can't. No, not a chance. Not a chance. I mean, look, yeah, if it was Arizona or something, but team players have looked the other way on Chicago shit for a long time.
As I said, remember what happened with Eric Lindros. That caused a lot of damage early on in his career in terms of perception. There are still to this day, it's caused some damage with some people who are trusted and noted hockey men. But, most people understand why he did what he did. But at the time it was horrible. So let's move on. The Ottawa Senators, the sale process is now starting to be towards the final phase. The bids are in.
Yeah.
There's 4. Ryan Reynolds is not a part of any of them. He made everyone known that he was pulling out of that sale. I'm assuming it's because Wrexham have just gone up in a league and he wants to really fund them properly.
Well, it's interesting because it sounded like the detail that ownership group wanted was they wanted some kind of exclusive negotiating window where they could work out a contract or whatever. And I'm like, that's never going to happen. That's the kind of thing that you put in when you know that you don't really have a chance and you're kind of just hoping that they give it to you anyway. Yeah.
So you've got an interesting array of people. So you've got one of the bidders is a part owner, is Michael Andlauer, who's a part owner of the Habs, 10%.
Yeah.
Who would have to obviously sell that share of the Habs if he was to, be the successful bid.
Yeah, a bit of conflict of interest.
The Kimmels of Toronto, who are minority owners of the Pens, former minority owners of the Pens, they sold to FSG. They were part of that group there. And Kyprios is their advisor. You've also got, in terms of the other bids, there's the LA group is the interesting one because Snoop Dogg's part of the LA group.
Yeah.
And has been walking around in an Ottawa Senators jersey now for 2 weeks, and telling everybody how much he loves the Ottawa Senators. And look, he does like hockey. We know Snoop genuinely likes hockey. He's in the NHL game. It's the Kings he likes, but they weren't up for sale.
No. I imagine that the Kings would not for sale anytime soon.
Yeah, and then the last bidder is one of my favorites to try to pronounce because look, he's not new to this, but it's one of those Greek names that goes forever. It's Steve Astapostopoulos. Yeah, Steve Astapostopoulos. So
I don't think that's right, but sure.
Yeah.
I think you put an extra S or 2 in there.
It's Apostolopoulos. That's
Apostolopoulos, I think it is, yeah.
Apostolopoulos. We're going to go with that, aren't we?
Yeah, right? Sure.
So he's been involved before with a lot of different sports ventures, including he was one of the last bidders to try to buy the Washington Commanders NFL team, which went for a significantly more exorbitant price than the Senators. The Senators is the chump change that they gave the NFL to investigate the concept. So he can easily afford the Sens. And I like the idea that that's a backup price. Didn't get the Commanders. So he have an NHL franchise. It's a nice little backup option. It'll be interesting to see where this goes. I'm interested. I said, I reckon that Ryan Reynolds' thing, apart from the negotiation thing, I think that Reynolds, I genuinely believe a lot of that is about wanting to put focus into Wrexham. I think because they've worked out what that's going to cost them, and it's going to. And he wasn't going to put money into this. But I think the time and the money that's going to be required in a football league club in the UK is far more than he could commit to with everything else. So I actually think that's probably why he is out. Speaking of out, Gerard Gallant has been fired as the coach of the Rangers. Sorry, not fired. Mutually agreed to part ways.
Yeah, that's right.
It was very mutual.
It's one of those things where you get someone into the room and you say, either you quit or we fire you, and you say, I agree to part ways.
Look, what happened is really obvious here. Gerard Gallant looked at the clock and looked at the calendar and went, "Oh shit, 2 years. Yeah, it's time for me to leave. I don't stick around any longer than that. Like we don't have any idea of what Gallant hockey looks like long term because we've never seen it. We've never seen Gerard Gallant get past the second.
It's pretty bizarre, honestly, to look back at his history and just see, 1 year, 2 years, 1 year, like it's almost pretty consistently too.
It's Peter de Boer hockey on a fast track. Like Peter de Boer lasts for about 5 years, and you get a really good first year with de Boer, a sort of good second year, a mediocre third year, and year 4 and 5, if you get that far, are terrible. Gallant does year 1 is great, and then halfway through year 2 is pretty good.
Yeah.
And then it falls apart at the end. And I wonder if it's a case of nobody can work with him after 2 years. He's just impossible. Because it feels a little bit like that.
Yeah, I wonder what it is. I wonder if it's a personality thing that it reaches a point where people stop responding to that, or something. Is it a system thing where people work it out and then he doesn't adjust? I don't know.
I can't tell you what a Gallant system really looks like. It's bottle everything up and be tough, and that's about it. And he had one of the most stacked. They went out and stacked the roster for the playoffs and gave him offensive weapons. I know that some of them were past their best, but they're still capable of producing and had demonstrated at points they could. And they gave him all of these weapons, and he did not use any of them. How do you not use them?
Yeah, and I think the deployment that he gave some people was questionable. And look, I don't think it was a perfect team by any means. I think that the interesting thing about coaching in the NHL is that there's a lot of average, and being significantly better than average is not always really obvious to see. The difference. We already know, I think, realistically, and people that don't believe this are probably kidding themselves, that coaching by and large doesn't have the hugest impact in hockey. Hockey is one of those sports where the GM probably has the biggest impact, and the players have, the players that are on the ice because of the GM, have that, the majority of that impact. I think coaching can ruin a team pretty easily, but it's hard for it to elevate a team significantly over the point where their players are, and only the really good kind of coaches that find, the way to make the best out of the players that they have or whatever really kind of put themselves above that pack. And I just think that there are, probably 20 guys in the league that are just interchangeable, and we just keep having this carousel of replacing them with another kind of average NHL coach.
Yeah, I'm really interested to see what happens next. I'm obviously really worried about the number of coaching firings at the moment because I am terrified that one of these clubs is going to ask San Jose if they can interview Ryan Wasowski. And I don't want him to go anywhere because I actually think he's the next Sharks head coach. And I think David Quinn's been told he can have another year to see what happens. And I think that's to get them through another year of rebuild so they look a bit better, and then you bring him in. I think that's the plan all along. And I'm worried that a club's going to short-circuit that by going, he's really good, especially a club that's got some good young talent, might come along and go, hey, you're really good with this. How about we bring you in and set you up for the next 5 years? Now, the issue for the Rangers is I don't know how the Rangers make a coaching decision that doesn't involve the words Darryl and Sutter as long as Chris Drury is the general manager. Because Drury seems to want, his whole ethos when he came in was tough, gritty, uncompromising. And I feel like this is coming. I feel like Daryl Sutter to the Rangers is going to be a thing. I mean,
look, it fits their MO.
My two options, I think, in at the moment for New York are it's either going to be Daryl Sutter or it could be Peter Laviolette.
I think they probably wait. They probably wait and see if anyone gets fired in this kind of
Sheldon Keefe.
And maybe someone becomes available that they suddenly jump on. That they weren't expecting to see, but it feels like a usual suspect. New York just doesn't seem like a team that's interested in really branching out into someone exciting and new.
It's a bit terrifying for me that New York Rangers have some really brilliant young talents, and they are so determined consistently to find coaches that don't work for any of them. What are our strengths? We've got this really cool kid line that could develop into something. We've got one of the best defensemen in the league in Adam Fox. We've got one of the best goalies in the league. This is fantastic. What are we going to do? Let's find a coach that likes third line scrubs. Okay, let's do that. Let's run that back. The Rangers have a lot of questions, I think, for this offseason. We talked about it in the last one. I still think there needs to be a discussion over Panarin. That could be an interesting conversation. I'm kind of wondering if the Rangers don't make a bit of a phone call to a team we're going to talk about later with Panarin and maybe suggest that you send us a large contract and we'll send you Panarin.
It'd be interesting. He has to have some kind of pretty major no trade clause, right?
Yeah, but I get the feeling there are certain clubs that he possibly waives for, but we'll talk about that in a minute. But interestingly enough, this means that everybody that was nominated for the Jack Adams last year is unemployed.
Yeah, of course. It's almost like an award for the hottest goalie or something.
It's almost like it doesn't matter.
Yeah,
it's almost like it doesn't matter.
It's almost like coaching is overrated.
Speaking of not mattering, the Flyers have looked far and wide. They sent scouts. They sent members of the organization to all four corners of the globe. They spoke to deeply trusted hockey individuals. They looked for new theories on hockey. They went out and they examined all the latest trends. They looked at college hockey. They looked at the WHL. They looked everywhere they could and decided to keep Danny Briere as the general manager and bring in Keith Jones as the president of Hockey Ops over the top of him. That was a long and extensive
look to the very edges of their organization and their alumni system.
They worked hard on that one. It's Keith Jones, formerly of Media and formerly of Flyers, and Danny Briere, obviously otherwise known as Carson Briere's father,
and former Flyer. Flyer. The NHL's a fucking joke, honestly. Yep. Like it's ridiculous. Like
hockey will be great once it's finished.
Yeah, I wonder if bookies take bets on like who is going to be hired for a lot of these jobs, because honestly, you'd have pretty good odds just picking the candidate who has like a personal relationship or whatever with the owner or the thing, or played for the team previously or whatever. Like, these can't be the people that are most qualified for an NHL general manager position. Like, he's been a commentator. He's been a commentator for 20 years or whatever, and he once played professional hockey or whatever. That doesn't qualify you to be a GM. That doesn't mean that you have the talents required to be a general manager.
Look at the other people that have been involved in that capacity, that have had those dual roles of media and in some way, shape, or form player personnel decisions. You've got the obvious one, which is Pierre, briefly in Ottawa, who turned up in Ottawa, was a special consultant, and then left the second that Eugene Melnick died. Everyone in the organization went, now he's dead, go away. And of course, everybody's favorite former general manager of the New York Islanders and former great NBC host, who, again, all the people in the group would love back, because NBC was, of course, the national coverage. So everyone wants a bit more Milbury in their lives.
Look, is it possible that these guys will be great front office stuff? Like, yeah, okay, maybe. Like, they've probably got a bunch of relationships and stuff. And I think that a lot about being an NHL front office is like already knowing and already golfing with all of those guys.
Yeah.
But the question is, should that be the requirement?
If you already know their handicap off the tee, it helps. It makes it so much easier.
You're in the second round of the the hiring process already. Basically, at that point in time, it's the nepotism league of nepotism league.
So here's my question: does this mean the most powerful individual inside the Flyers organization is John Tortorella?
Probably.
Is he more powerful than Keith Jones and Danny Briere?
I mean, probably not, because we know probably within a year he'll be fired.
But can you see Danny Briere telling John Tortorella what to do?
I can't imagine that conversation goes well, but that doesn't mean that he doesn't have the power to fire him.
Yeah, but Tortorella leveraged a lot when he went to Philly. Like, he leveraged a lot of... And remember, we know that the ownership in Philadelphia loves John Tortorella. Absolutely. Yeah. They chased him down for this job because they believe that he gets Philly. And that just means he's rough.
Yeah.
So, and no nonsense, which is code for old.
I think that he's probably safe for another couple of years just based on the fact that they're going to be bad and they're probably going to rebuild anyway. But we know he's one of those guys that, he has a shelf life like everyone else.
Well, he always has a shelf life, but like nobody bothers to ever pay attention to it.
No.
All right.
It always goes a year longer than it should.
Let's get to round 2, and let's get to the one that we all know is probably going to take the longest to talk about.
Yeah.
The Florida Panthers defeat the Toronto Maple Leafs in 5. The interesting part, before we get to the rest of this, the really interesting part for me was the Leafs played better in this series than they did against Tampa. And like, again, they won. They most of the games that Toronto won in the playoffs this year were all overtime. And a lot of away. Like, they won away from home. They couldn't win at home.
That was a weird series. It went back and forth with the away team winning. Honestly, that was a lot of the first round, which was pretty strange. But yeah, to be fair, like, Bobrovsky's gone through this renaissance of deciding that, he's going to be a Vezina caliber goalie for a few rounds of the playoffs. That helps a lot. We know that, a goalie getting hot in a series can make a huge difference. Toronto not scoring more than 2 goals in any game in that series is a big indictment.
It's been the longest they were talking about for the core group of players. Like, their goalless run they went on is the longest one they've gone on in some ridiculous amount of years. Like, that's been like since they've gone on this sort of streak, it's a ridiculous amount of time. Of those players, Nylander was the one who was good consistently. Marner had one game where he woke up and suddenly played like Mitch Marner. Matthews, something's wrong with he wasn't healthy. There's no way he was healthy. He played okay, but the shot wasn't there and he was missing. Yeah. And Tavares sort of had a good first round, but then did nothing in the second round. The interesting part for Toronto is the depth that Kyle Dubas went out and got to make this team better performed really well.
I think the interesting didn't. Yeah. I think the interesting thing for me is, I can't remember if we talked about this as a possibility, but like, we were talking about, once they get past the first round, once they overcome that, either they're going to take off and it'll all be in the past and it'll be a weight lifted off their shoulders, or they'll be like, okay, we've done our jobs, and they'll take a breath. And I think that the problem is that the latter happened. I think that they got past that first round and then they went, this is the best thing that's ever happened, where, can relax them. And it took them a couple of games to kind of get back to that level of intensity in the Florida series. I think in the first couple of series, the first couple of games of the Florida series, they just weren't ready.
They were 2-0 up. They were 2-0 up in the first game, and then they stopped playing.
Yeah, then they're like, oh, this is great. This is all going well. And the thing about Florida is, Florida is not like an incredible defensive team. They're not we've seen a lot of Florida games this year be, 7-6 barn burner kind of games. But the thing is, they forecheck hard. They battle for pucks. They've got a bunch of kind of guys that excel in a playoff situation, those kind of gritty in the corners, winning puck battle kind of things. And I think that when you take your foot off a little bit, when you take a step back and get a bit kind of like pleased with where you are, which maybe that's what they did at the start of the series, and it took them a little bit to get back to the level of intensity towards the back end of the series. Like maybe that set them back.
See, I think a third option happened. I think they got through and tightened the hell up. I don't think they relaxed. I think they tightened the hell up.
Okay.
And I think the other thing that happened was Sheldon Keefe. And Keefe has shown that he's a really good regular season coach. But you tell me that Sheldon Keefe outcoached either of the coaches he was up against in the playoffs. John Cooper decimated him in the first round. He was really lucky. In the second...
To be fair, they probably shouldn't have won that first round realistically. But
in the second round, Paul Maurice destroyed him. Absolutely destroyed him. And he overthought... If David Kemp had a fantastic series overall for Toronto, but every time you got to under a minute to go, they were behind and they had an offensive zone face-off, David Kemp was on the ice.
Yeah.
Like, that line was out there. He wasn't putting the big lines out there. He was putting these players that are supposed to be their depth into the key moments instead. And I know that, like, a Matthews hadn't necessarily been playing that well, or a Marner hadn't been playing that well.
Yeah.
But you're paying these guys to be out there in the last minute.
You got to live and die with your stars, I think.
David Camp's going to score us a goal at the end. No, he's not. He's not going to score you a goal.
It's not what he's there for.
So I think we'll talk more about Florida when we get to the preview. So Florida fans or people who are going, you're talking about the Leafs, talk about the Panthers are coming up because they're still there.
They're still in the playoffs. I think that the Panthers have obviously, hit the ground running. But we talked about it in the last episode. They've been playing playoff hockey for 3 months now because they've had to make it in, and they've got that kind of drive and intensity to kind of get through. The reality is, like, if Bobrovsky hadn't been playing out of his mind, it's possible that series still would have gone the other way.
I think it would have, but
it's very likely that Toronto still could have won that series in 5 or 6 or whatever. It could have just, each of those games could have just been flipped just based on goaltending. That's just kind of the reality of the playoffs.
And they talked a lot, like there was a lot of conversation in terms of in their media availabilities, where the players sort of acknowledged the problem was they let Bobrovsky settle. They said we had him rattled early. In that first game, they made him look really bad in that first period. And then they let him settle and gave him no screenshots and did nothing to put any form of pressure on him and let him get in. And once Bobrovsky's locked in, you're in trouble. So they kind of let him play his way back into a series and then couldn't beat him and couldn't work out why they couldn't beat Bobrovsky. Like, you did it to yourselves. I think in terms of because there's a couple of big conversations obviously coming up. And again, Toronto is a lot of this conversation. It's definitely a lot of this conversation. Now, part of it is, what do? They've got to make changes. They have to make some changes here. There's a lot of talk about what's going on with Dubas, because obviously Dubas has an expiring contract. Dubas at media availability today said one of two things is going to happen. He's either going to re-sign with the Maple Leafs as general manager, or he is taking time off. He will not pop up in another job in the next 12 months. There's been a lot of time away from family, the strain and the stress of what he's done. And he was very frank about that. He talked about there's a lot of family pressures and, young family, and I'm either coming back or you won't see me pop up. Like, I'm not popping up in Pittsburgh tomorrow. That's not a thing that's going to happen. I'm still not convinced that he doesn't end up in the president of hockey ops job. There's a lot of talk that he and Shanahan don't get along. It was interesting that Keefe and Dubas were available today and Shanahan is available later in the week. That was really interesting. I think Sheldon Keefe is gone. I think once they complete their review, Sheldon Keefe will go.
I think that's the easiest change to make. Like, we know,
and I think he needs to.
Yeah, we know organizations that want to shift things up or whatever. They know that firing the coach will give them a bump, will change their kind of culture, will do all of these things or whatever. And it's the easiest decision to make because it has no cap ramifications, and they don't have to find a suitor for a trade or something.
The interesting part for Toronto in the front office too is they've got options as general manager outside of Dubas. And we talked about internal hiring. Brandon Pridham's name keeps coming up with all general manager jobs that are appearing right now. He's the capologist. He wrote the rules of the cap and now works for the Leafs in helping them get around, issues. So Pridham has been mentioned as a general manager potential in a number of cities. Also, they've got their special advisor to the general manager, Jason Spezza, who you get the feeling they want him somewhere in the organizational structure. So there's options there for them if they decide to go one of those routes. And, hockey men hiring hockey men, we know. Yeah. The other big part of it is they're talking about they've got to trade one of the core. And Dubas's comment today was nothing is off the table to make this team win. As opposed to previously where he's like, I'm not touching the core, I'm not touching the core, I'm not touching the core. His press conference today was nothing is off the table. I will do whatever I need to do move-wise to win. Now, a lot of people have brought up Florida, and they've brought up the Huberdeau-Tkachuk trade as, look at Florida making the big move, and that's what worked for them. And yes, that did work for them. Florida are also a very good team. And like everyone's pretending that Florida was terrible and now suddenly they're here. No, they had a bad start to the season, but Florida won the President's Trophy last year.
Yeah,
like
true.
They're not a bad club.
People are quietly deciding that Florida was bad all along, but yeah.
I think the problem is that the player that they should move is not the player they can move.
Yeah.
They can't move Tavares. That's a hard deal to move. I think it's either going to be Mana or Nylander. I would not move Nylander, but it's the easiest trade. I feel
think that the reality is that any of those are a difficult move to make. But firstly, obviously because of the cap ramifications. Secondly, because of movement things limiting the teams that you can go to and make changes, whatever. Like making a meaning, like you can move one of them if you just want to dump cap or whatever.
No move for Mana doesn't kick in until after the draft.
Oh, interesting. Well, I mean, that's a potential option, but like I think there's still limited teams that you can get something that's gonna I think finding a hockey trade that is actually going to make them better in some way is more difficult than we make it out to be. But not just because like I do think that GMs overtalk how difficult it is to make trades, but I think that they make it that situation because they are all like, oh, it's too hard and they don't want to do it. I think it's more difficult because the guy on the other end of the phone doesn't want to do it.
I think, and that's why I said maybe the Rangers make a phone call with Panarin and go, hey, what would you say if we did? Maybe they try to get Mana just as throwing it out there. And try to get Panarin to go the other direction.
Interesting. I don't know that makes Toronto any better, but
I don't know if it makes Toronto any better. But this is the other point. The other big point to this, and it's going to come up when we talk about the Oilers too, is I think that the largest problem faced by Canadian teams is Canadian media. I think the biggest problem, to be blunt, the biggest problem for the Canadian teams is Canada as a whole. We saw it in the NHL fans group. And I'm sorry, Canadians who might be listening to this, you're not going to like what I'm about to say. If I saw one more bit of Canadian exceptionalism pop up in any of these conversations, I was going to scream. Right? Well, now the whole thing's over because, that's it. We've seen it. Gary Bettman is sitting back smoking a cigar now that all the Canadian teams he doesn't care. You know what? He probably wants Canadian teams to make it because there's more revenue in that. There's far more revenue in that. Gary Bettman didn't make Canadian teams suck. You know why Canadian teams lose? Because they have to listen to the media who tell them what moves they have to make. They have to listen to grizzled old Canadian hockey men who tell them what moves they have to make. If they do make the moves and they don't work, it's you were stupid. Why did you make that move? And if they don't listen, well, you should have listened to us. What we really needed was to go out and get someone to fight. We needed someone to punch someone's face in. That's what
it's numerically a little stacked against them too. There's only 7 of them out of and 25 American teams. But
this is not the old league, guys. This is not the old league.
This is not the original 6 where fucking 4 of the teams were Canadian or whatever like this.
And also, just before you go, don't give me that crap of, well, look, they're all Canadians playing, so really Canada's winning. There's Russians, there's Czechs, there's everybody playing, right? Guess what, guys? Like Russia doing quite well at the moment.
Right now, I think the most impact players that are still in the playoffs are Finns
or Americans in terms of Kachuk.
Well, yeah, but I mean, if you look at like the 4 teams remaining, like you look at Aho, you look at Barkov, you look at all the Heiskin and all these kind of guys or whatever. Like you're looking at a bunch of Finns.
Exactly, and I just you can cherry pick whatever data you want, but Canadian exceptionalism doesn't explain why you get knocked out all the time, right? The American markets largely have the benefit of nobody in those markets threatening to blow the team up if they don't trade for grizzled third line veterans. Like it's absolutely ridiculous. Kyle Dubas, to defend Dubas, and I do defend Dubas a lot, I know, but Kyle Dubas has made literally every move that you wanted him to make. The team doesn't win, and they go, Dubas should be fired. What's he doing? Giving them every weapon.
So I think the thing is, like, if you're a fan of a team who's like a contender or has been like in the playoff race for a long time, like talking from the perspective of like, the Penguins who had their playoff streak end, like that, every Canadian team has that level of pressure, which is stupid. Yeah. Like, it's like, I get it from like, spoiled Penguins fans who've watched 16 years of Penguins playoff success, and they look at that, and then if everything is a slight, everything is like, you've got to trade Malkin, you've got to trade, everything is like the end of the world kind of thing. I get that because they're so spoiled, but like the fans of like the Maple Leafs or whatever, like, and the media around the Maple Leafs, they're doing these hot takes when the team doesn't even make the playoffs.
Sid Sixero immediately tweets out, Kyle Dubas is a fraud. Yeah. It's like they lose in the second round. Last week they were ready to chair him around the city of Toronto and name whatever they wanted after him. This week they lose that. Kyle Dubas is a fraud. It's like that is an absolutely terrible hot take.
Yeah. And do you think the media around like Dallas or whatever does that every year they get knocked out?
No, and that's the thing. It's like, and the other interesting part is it's largely because people don't want to hear it, but Toronto does drive views. I guarantee you will not hear, and we're going to talk about Edmonton. You won't hear the same level of chatter around the Edmonton Oilers. You will not hear the same level. People are judging Edmonton as, they're on the cusp of greatness now, and they're on the cusp of. Edmonton is a 2-person team. And we're going to talk about them in a bit more depth later. But, at least Toronto had depth. The funny part about it is that Toronto's top end failed and the depth was great. And in Edmonton, the top 2 players were legendary and everybody else on the roster sucked. So if you put those 2 together, you'd end up with one really shit team and one unstoppable team. That's the situation. Like, you've got different things going on there, but they're both equally failing. Also, I love poor old Steve Dangle, but the man needs a holiday. The latest podcast was unhinged, and it was just, the referees didn't cost Toronto because he wants to blame Toronto, and then when they talked about Edmonton, it was the referees cost Edmonton their shot at the Stanley Cup, and I'm like, don't put yourself in a spot where the referees can cost you a game. Simple, and maybe defend once in a while. So. Go on holiday,
We'll get to that series. Let's move on to the next one.
We will. So let's move on to the next one, which is nice and straightforward to talk about. The Carolina Hurricanes defeated the New Jersey Devils in 5 games. Now, this was largely the New Jersey Devils' magic dust in net stopped working. Pretty much.
I mean, look, I think it's all gravy, honestly, for the Devils. Like,
it is.
From the start of this year, no one was picking the Devils to make the playoffs. No one was picking the Devils to be, this incredible, team or anything. Obviously, Jack Hughes is kind of hitting his stride, becoming the player that, he was, I don't know, I want to say destined to be, but like, his upside, he's hitting his upside, he's hitting his peak. So, for them, like getting into the playoffs, winning a round, starting to kind of see things coming together, I think it's all gravy to them. It was at some point the wheels were going to come off, and they hit just a honestly stronger and more seasoned team, and that's just kind of how it goes. I don't know if there's much more to that story.
look, I thought this was going to happen last series. They got through that because the Rangers absolutely imploded on themselves.
Yeah.
Carolina is, and look, Florida's, we'll talk about that matchup coming up, but Carolina are a machine.
Yeah.
They're not flashy. They are just going to destroy you if you make a mistake. And like Sebastian Aho's been really good. I think, again, he took the powers from Sebastian Aho in the first series. And like, it's just, they're just a bit of a machine, and they're just sort of ticking along really nicely. They haven't really kicked into any gears, Carolina.
No, and I think that, they've just kind of been quietly doing work by committee. They're not scoring 8 goals in a game or anything like that, but they're just quietly, overpowering teams, winning puck battles, putting the puck in the net, and not allowing anyone to score on them.
The plus side, and we'll just to talk about the Devils a bit more before we sort of finish up. The Devils, as you said, it's all gravy, but what should really be good for them? Jack Hughes had a great playoffs, and is what they needed and what they wanted. I just feel, I just feel like they got really good play out of Jack Hughes, which is what you want. Dawson Mercer looked good for them as well. So
there's a lot of promising young guys coming up.
Look, and my biggest disappointment for the Devils,
he should kind of come into his own, as a player and so forth. Like, I think, they're definitely going to be a power in the Metro for a while.
My biggest disappointment remains the fact that they didn't go another round, because that would have got San Jose first. And I really needed San Jose to get the extra first. But you live, you learn. Overall, I think it's, again, it was sort of a pretty straightforward series. There was no real threat to Carolina at any point in time, and it just sort of it ran down. There's not a lot to talk about, unfortunately, with it, because it's just really easy. What there is a lot to talk about is in the battle for my affections among two teams that I can't stand. The sworn enemy of myself, the team that rolls like an egg, the Vegas Golden Knights, defeated the kiddie pool that is the Edmonton Oilers' depth in 6 games. Okay. I've been waiting to come off the run. Again, we know I like coming off a good run up. Connor McDavid, 12 games, 8 goals, 12 assists. Leon Draisaitl, 12 games, 13 goals, 5 assists. Evan Bouchard, I'll give him his flowers as well. 12 games, 4 goals, 13 assists. Yep. There you go. That's brilliant. That's pretty much all you need to know. Here's the problem. The Edmonton Oilers are an absolute wagon on the power play.
Oh, yeah.
And when you get to 5-on-5, not so much. And the trick was try not to go onto the power play. Now, Vegas started actually killing power plays, which was interesting. But Edmonton on the power play were like, there was some statistic that I think Nugent Hopkins. So Ryan Nugent Hopkins ended up with 10 assists and one goal for 11 points. So, but in terms,
but he's also on the top power play.
Yeah, in terms of what he got, I think it was 1 point that was even strength. So it was even strength goals, 1 even strength goal, 1 even strength assist. Everything else was power play. Everything else. McDavid scored 2 in even strength, and his 5 were on, and then 5 on the power play. Draisaitl was a bit of an outlier, 7 and 6, so he scored more. I have said all the way along in these playoffs, if you can control 97 and 29 or limit their damage, the rest of the team is gettable. And what happened was Vegas picked the other lines to pieces. They picked the defense to pieces. And the goaltending in Edmonton was atrocious. And basically, Jack Eichel went, oh, hi, I'm here, and this is me in the playoffs, and this is what I look like. And the answer is really damn good. And Vegas just outplayed them. They outplayed Edmonton.
Which I think the thing for Edmonton is, like, as we're talking about, if you can find a way to survive the McDavid and Draisaitl, pairing, if you can find a way at even strength to survive that line, try and kill the penalties. And the thing interesting for me was by the end of the series, Edmonton were trying to, like, at home, not line match against
game 6.
Like William Carlson. Yeah, game 6, like with the series on the line, they're pulling McDavid off the ice because William Carlson is on the ice.
Cassidy worked it out and just kept on sending the Carlson line out there.
Yeah.
And McDavid kept on, like, starting on the bench. And you're like, what are you doing?
Yeah. You've got home, you've got first change and you've
got the change.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, I think they really kind of, found a way to, like, suppress that line a little bit. Obviously, they're going to get a couple of goals. Like, I think that the 2 goals that they ended up with in that last game were both, generated through those 2. But the reality is that Vegas are going to win all of those other matchups. Like, if someone else is on the ice and it's not, McDavid, and it's not Draisaitl, they're going to win those matchups. And that's just been the reality for Edmonton pretty much the entire time that McDavid has been there. If they can find a way to field, like, the rest of their lineup in a way that they don't even have to significantly win matchups. They just have to marginally, tread water, go break even against everyone else so that McDavid and Draisaitl can win the game for them. But that seems to be too much for them.
I still don't really know if Vegas is actually any good in these playoffs or not.
Because, I don't know. I'm not sure.
But this is the thing. The Edmonton defense is that bad. Like, it was genuinely horrific. Now, we'll mention it because someone's going to pop up in the comments and go, oh, yes, but if you suspended Pietrangelo for 5.5 years for slashing Leon Draisaitl, they would have won the cup by now. And, yeah, Pietrangelo should have got more than we got.
Yeah, 100%. Absolutely. Like, that was
absolutely
bullshit. But...
No one is arguing that that's not the case. But if you want to argue that the entire series is because you couldn't get Alex Pietrangelo off the ice, by the way, the game that he was suspended for, Vegas won easily.
Yeah.
So, like, and I know there were people like, oh, Draisaitl was clearly hurt after that, and so his shot was gone, and that was a problem. And he still played really well. Him and McDavid were still playing really well, and you've still got those 2. Like, if you are relying on is Pietrangelo on the ice or not as your saving grace, you're not doing the series properly. And also, like, not to do that. And also, by the way, but you really want it. Like, referees sucked across the board. Mark Stone nearly got killed about 8 times.
Yeah.
And at one point, Evander Kane had someone down on the ice defenseless and was ground and pounding him like it was an octagon.
Yeah, the NHL was fucking ridiculous for
the officiating has been absolutely terrible, but it's been terrible everywhere.
Yeah, like if you took a shot every time a referee just chose not to call a blatant penalty that happened right in front of them, period. You would be dead by the end of game 1. Like, it's just that's just like the reality of NHL.
The officiating has been terrible across the board, though. It hasn't just been Edmonton was shafted and that's it. No. There were calls the other way. I said Mark Stone at one point, and there was, I think it was game 2, I think it was, where every time Mark Stone went anywhere near the puck, someone hit him in the back of the head.
Yeah.
And like they were just every time it was just like bang, another short one, bang, another short one. Look, I 100% Pietrangelo should have got longer, but I said that about Makar. I've said that it's not happening, right? They're not going to do it. It's the playoffs, so you're not going to get those penalties happening because playoffs and
honestly at this point I just feel sorry for McDavid. Like, he's closing in on 30 at this point in time. Like, the insane
he's 25 but
but I mean he's 26.
Draisaitl's 27.
Yeah, he's 26. He's 27 next year, so he has realistically 2 maybe 3 playoffs left in his 20s, and like that doesn't sound like 30 whatever. Like, he's still going to be an incredible player at 30, but you've got to you've got to think about like none of the like superstars, not like Crosby, all of these kind of guys. None of them won in their 30s. Very few of those stars win in their 30s.
My question,
and it represents a point where you've wasted like 10 plus years of your career.
My question for the Oilers, is everyone's talking about, Toronto cleared a first round, made it to the second round, losing the second round, absolute bums and failures. People are not discussing the Oilers in the exact same light, and I really think they should. You have the two best players in the world at this point in time. The two best players in the world at this point in time. And what you have put around them is not good enough. It is not good enough. And again, you make the one good trade where you go out and get Matthias Ekholm. That's a great trade, right? But Ken Holland now has one great trade. One.
And you've got to look at the great, oeuvre of work of everyone who's basically been there and creating the Oilers roster through the entirety of McDavid's career. How many like teams that look like a serious contender have they constructed during the entirety of McDavid's career? Like, as much as you can say that Toronto is a big letdown and disappointment, it's because, at least on paper, their teams have looked good many times, and
they've taken swings.
How many times, honestly, has the Oilers roster looked good beyond the first two lines?
They've taken
pretty much.
Toronto's taken swings, and I'd argue that Edmonton punts every year. Yeah. And like next year, they've got 5.97 in projected cap space. They've got to re-sign Evan Bouchard. That's before you get to Klim Kostin. That's before you look at McLeod. It's, and as mentioned, as is mentioned in the chat, wouldn't it be really good if they had players like Jordan Eberle or Taylor Hall? That would have been fantastic. Like, this is a team that's been given everything. They've been given everything, and they cannot make it work. And
they have the hard parts. They have the hard to get parts, and they just can't.
They have the bit that everyone else would kill for.
Shit.
They have the bit that everyone else would kill for. Everyone else would kill for one of those two.
Yeah.
And Nugent Hopkins is now 30, and his new contract is 5.125 until the end of time. Zach Hyman is 30 with 5.5 until the end of time. Evander Kane is on 5.125 for the next 3 years after this one. And he's 31.
Honestly, if you took like, whatever, $10 million worth of random players off Seattle and put McDavid on that team probably wins the cup.
Oh, easy. It's really poor roster design, and it gets covered up because you've got Draisaitl and because you've got McDavid. They cover so much. And if Oilers fans really want to know why they're not winning the cup and want to talk about, getting shafted by refs or getting this or this or this, I posted in the comment the other day, and I heard back from people who are not particularly happy with me, but I don't care. I have been saying the whole series, at some point, Edmonton needs to learn to defend and keep the puck out of the net, or they're not going to go far. Then again, same thing. We got to the end of the game the other day, and I did post immediately, is it time to talk about Edmonton's ability to defend yet? We've been saying it the whole way along, and all of this theory was, no, they'll just outscore everybody. You can't do that in the playoffs. It doesn't work. We know.
So looking at the series, so they allowed 6 goals in game 1. They allowed 1 in game 2, which was impressive. They allowed 5 in game 3. 1 and then 4 and then 5.
And that was
if you're letting in 5+ in your losses or whatever, that's not great.
I was hearing from people in game 4 going, so what do you have to say about this defense now? And I went, they were crap in game 1. They were good in game 2. They were crap in game 3. This is game 4. I know how this pattern goes. And sure enough, the next game they shipped 4. The difference was in game 6, they shipped 5. And it's just anybody who sat down and looked at that roster knew what was coming. What I think the biggest problem was, and we'll move on to the last series in a minute, But what I think the biggest problem was, once again, we go back to Canadian media. The Canadian media, in particular, paid no attention to anybody in the West at all. And it was, the West is terrible. The East is a behemoth. We're not really worried about what's going to happen in the West. Edmonton will cruise through that because the West is full of really poor teams. 7 out of the top 10 scoring players this season play in the West. 8 of the top 11, if you count Erik Karlsson sitting at 11. Mitch Marner is 13th. You would have thought he was in the top 5 for scoring in the league. The West dominated scoring. It's not just because people go, well, the West was a worse conference in terms of defense and blah, blah. Get Erik Karlsson got 100 points. Like, seriously, the Sharks are not good. Not good. But the scoring was in the West. So thinking that Edmonton could just run over the top of everybody like they didn't exist because the West is terrible was such a bubble view. And I think there are a lot of Western teams, one we're about to talk about in particular, who I think are ready to cram that down some people's throats.
Yeah, I think, and look, I think that I should be clear, like when we talk about defense, we're talking about team defense. It's not just their defensive core. It's, it's up and down their lineup. And I'm more than willing to say to McDavid and Draisaitl, you don't need to play defense. That's totally fine. But you need to have a rest of the team that's willing to commit to breaking even on the ice.
My last question is, I think we both agree that Sheldon Keefe is gone in Toronto, or should be gone in Toronto.
Probably. I think it's most likely.
How the hell does Jay Woodcroft have a job?
I mean,
I can't work out. It's not being mentioned. I don't know why.
I mean, I don't know that necessarily that this is coaching at this stage. It needs
defensive
personnel.
systems. But defensive systems.
Yeah, but I mean, there's some the personnel that they have. I don't know that they're the right people for the job.
So the decision then is Jay Woodcroft or Ken Holland, because one of them has to go.
It should be Holland, but
it should be Ken. Well, we've talked about this forever. I think that Ekholm trade means there's not a hope in hell.
Probably
they get rid of him because they go, but you got Ekholm.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, but look at the rest of what's around him.
Yeah, and they'll still look at stuff that, recently, like, oh, you brought in, Van de Kane, you brought in this, like the team's better than it was a couple of years ago, but it's still not good enough.
By the way, I really think the Evander Kane explosion is any day now. He nearly happened a few times in these playoffs. I don't think he gets through another year without having that eruption. So let's get to the last series, and unfortunately, the Seattle Kraken could not make it an expansion doubleheader.
Disappointing. It got close.
The Dallas Stars defeat the Seattle Kraken in 7 games. Look, Seattle, they were good. Yeah. They were really good. I
was impressed, honestly. They pushed it to the limit. I thought there was a good chance that
we talked about systems. We were talking before about systems hockey.
Yeah,
Seattle played really good systems hockey. I've got this lot of personnel. How do I make this lot of personnel go far? That's what they did.
And honestly, like today, it was 0-0 until halfway through the second. It just kind of really, it was kind of going to be one of those like whoever scores wins kind of games.
And they nearly got it back at the end too. They nearly sent it to overtime.
Yeah, real close. It's honestly that game could have very much gone either way. Probably it was nice to see a series kind of be relatively close pretty much the whole way through. Like there were a few kind of blowouts, but for the most part, like it was a pretty, tightly fought series. Interesting, like I think an interesting thing for me from the perspective is like Jason Robertson's actually been kind of quiet so far. In terms of Dallas. Like I think that there's another gear there that he hasn't found yet. Maybe it's just a lack of playoff experience or something like that. But that could be real fun if he gets going. Like honestly, I think the Rupe Hintz explosion has kind of really helped Dallas in a lot of ways.
Second in scoring in the playoffs.
Yeah, if you can find a way to get Robertson going as well in the next series, they're going to be a force to be reckoned with.
Like Rupe Hintz has now outscored Draisaitl.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like he's outscored Draisaitl now, and he's only 1 point behind. So there's a question before about, we're talking about the order of the Conn Smythe. It was a Gudis for the Conn Smythe and stuff like that. No, Rupe, if Dallas go all the way, it's Rupe hands. At this point in time, with an outside shot, obviously for a certain netminder. But I think at the moment Rupe Hens has been absolutely brilliant. I think Robertson's been quiet, as you said, but he's still got 12 points. So
yeah, I think for me, like, if of the 4 teams remaining, like the Conn Smythe candidate has to be Hintz, I imagine Jack Eichel, probably Matthew Tkachuk, maybe Bobrovsky. That's probably a coin toss. For me, Carolina, I don't know. It's probably Aho, but like, there's no one who's been like far and away
because it's been committee.
Yeah, it's been committee.
The other point there as well is the idea of, and Shannon just pointed out in the chat about Vegas not having the goaltending to beat the Stars. Look, all you need is a goaltender to decide that to be like Aiden Hill to that, which was Aiden Hill decided I'm really good. And we've seen that Aiden Hill can have individual moments.
Realistically, any goalie can get hot for 4 games. That we know that is one of the crazy things.
And
about
Vegas
goal.
is all defense, and that's the thing.
Every year there's a random goalie that decides he's great for a series.
What Vegas does really well, and like again, I'm well known of talking about the fact that, again, they roll like an egg. They're still not well constructed, but what they do very well is their collapse defense around the net when high pressure chances start. His movements are erratic, and his movements have always been erratic. Like, again, we had him at the Sharks. The reason we moved him was he was too erratic in net consistently. But we also didn't have a defense that was able to take rebounds away, that was able to take that positioning away, that could keep people away from his net to give him time to settle. And what Vegas can do really well is give him time to reset himself. And, there were a few times you saw it today where there was a chance that he could have been a bit all over in the last game when he was playing against Edmonton. There was a chance a couple of times there for Edmonton to pull him out of position, and the defense just collapsed in and prevented the positioning. And so that's what Vegas does really well, is stops those rebound chances from coming to the people in front of the net.
Well, let's talk about the conference final previews, because obviously at this point in time, so it's going to be Vegas versus Dallas. I think, I think that Shannon has a good point. Obviously Dallas has the edge in goaltending in that regard. Like whether or not that's the decider for it, I'm not too sure. I think this is going to be a pretty close series, honestly.
It's an interesting one for me, because what we've got is DeBoer hockey versus a team that defends really well, stopping things that DeBoer hockey does, and knows DeBoer hockey because they played it. I think that Dallas has the players to play the system better than Vegas can defend it.
I think that you're right. I think that you're right in that regard.
They've got Joe Pavelski. Like, they've got the greatest tip-in merchant the world's ever seen.
Yeah, for sure. Like, I think, if you compare it up and down the lineup, like, I could absolutely see, there's game breakers on either side. I could absolutely see, Jack Eichel and Mark Stone going off the wall. I could see Robertson and Hintz going off the wall. Like, there's definite X factors that could, take over a series in that regard. But if you lay it all out, like, Dallas is probably the more solid team with less question marks. Like,
this is the depth. This is the depth series of the two of them. This is the depth series.
Yeah, like if Vegas had, the goaltending, if Vegas had like a comparable goaltender, it's probably a coin flip. But that might be the factor that causes the difference. It might not be. Aiden Hill may just stand on his head. He may just decide that he's great.
I'm now very much happy with the idea that Vegas are going to lose. Obviously, I kind of wanted them to win the last series because I didn't want Edmonton rewarded for poor roster construction. Having said that, I also still don't trust Vegas, and I think they roll like an egg, and I've always thought they roll like an egg, and nothing they've done has changed my mind. I think what you've got is Eichel and Stone at the top of the Vegas lineup. Again, Marchessault had a really good game in that last game against Edmonton. He hasn't been brilliant. that was suddenly him going, oh, that's right, this is what I do. I think that once you get through those tops, so if you take the idea of Robertson and Rebbe Hintz and you take them and you take the Vegas equivalency there and take them out, I think that players like Pavelski give them the edge. And I think it's probably, you've got Heiskanen that bombing from the point. You've got Joe Pavelski standing in front of the net, and you've got Jason Robertson feeding off crumbs. And I just think that, as you said, the problem I think for Vegas is going to be that you're likely to get really poor initial puck control from Adin Hill, and where Edmonton wasn't able to get players in front to pick those crumbs up, Joe Pavelski lives there.
Yeah.
Robertson lives there.
Yeah.
So I think it's too easy for them to pick them off. And I think that we'll probably get a Dallas win. I actually think it will be fairly convincing. I'm not sure if it's 5 or 6. I don't think it goes 7. I think Dallas will win fairly convincingly here.
Yeah, my pick at this point in time is Dallas in 6.
Yeah, 5 or 6. I'll go 5 just to be different. But I just feel like again, Adin Hill got away with his puck control because the defense did such a good job. But you've got 2 players on Dallas who live for that. Like whereas with Edmonton, Draisaitl and McDavid aren't. Let's pick up the crumbs, people.
Yeah, it's probably gonna require a Herculean effort from Adin Hill to pull it across the line for Vegas. And look, it's
I'll start Jonathan Quick. I'll start Jonathan Quick, king of the puck control.
That's right. Carolina versus Florida. This is an interesting one for me because I don't know if I have like a strong feeling either way. Like I think that both teams have benefits in that regard. Like looking at it from like my first instinct, I guess, is to lean towards Carolina because I think that they're a better team top to bottom. But from Florida's perspective, like there's that underdog factor. There's that fact that they've been, playing playoff hockey for such a long time. There's the Kachuk factor. There's just so much that they can do, which will just, get in Carolina's wheelhouse and just stir up shit. And I think that the interesting kind of maybe the X factor for me is just whether or not the Florida kind of defensive system and Bobrovsky and what they've kind of been able to do so far continues. If they can do that and they can keep Carolina's scoring chances like out as they've managed to do against 2 of the top teams in the league so far, then I can absolutely see a game plan where they can stifle Carolina and outscore them. But I don't know. I still find it difficult to put my faith in Bobrovsky not cracking.
10, 10, 8, 8, 8, 8, 6, 6, 6, 6. That's the scoring on Carolina. Right? That's their top players. Their top player, Sebastian Aho, has 10. Yeah. Right. I think the other interesting part of that is of those goals and things like that. So, for example, Sebastian Aho has 5 goals. 4 of them are even strength. Yeah. Like Martin has 3 goals. 2 are even strength.
Martin, by the way, having like an insane series. He's probably never he scores 20 points a year and he has like 10 in the last 5 games. I don't think that's going to keep up, but
he has 7 assists. He has 6 of those in even strength. I think the big difference here is the Carolina Hurricanes score as a committee and they score even strength, not just relying on get a power play, get some goals in there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the thing that we know about Carolina is they continue to come in waves. They'll get 50 shots on net and maybe they'll score 4 of them.
I think that I just feel like when you look at, and the other thing is too, their ice time's really interesting. So if you go through the time on ice when overall in terms of the stats at the moment, Brent Burns has their highest time on ice at 23 minutes, almost 24 minutes. Brett Pesce is next at 21 minutes on the ice. Jakob Slavin and Brett Pesce have 22 and 21. After that, they're all in 18, 17, 16s. They haven't spent a lot of time on the ice either. They're rotating this roster because they trust all of the lines.
Yeah.
Right? They trust their lines. Paul Stastny's played 11 minutes on average. He has 3 even strength goals. Right? He's scoring.
Couple big ones too.
Yeah, like Gostisbehere is 16 minutes on ice. You know, he's playing more power play minutes, but they're all getting their points, and they're not spending a huge amount of time on ice to get the points. I just feel like Carolina is fairly rested. I think they're a very strong team. They're a very focused team. Nothing phases them, right?
Yeah.
I think the Leafs rattled the hell out of themselves before that series started. And I think psychologically, I think that Florida had it all over them beforehand because the Leafs terrified themselves. You know,
I mean,
Sheldon,
Carolina have already lost Teravainen and Svechnikov and all of these kind of guys already. And, technically, I guess you could say Pacioretty, but, and they're just continuing to roll on.
Do you think that Rod Brind'Amour is going to fall into Sheldon Keefe's trap?
No.
No, exactly. I think that Rod Brind'Amour is too smart. I think he's just too stubborn. And I think that the other thing that's possibly going to happen here that Toronto didn't do is I can see Carolina not letting Bobrovsky settle. Yeah. And if you've got Brent Burns standing at the point, bombing it in, and unlike Toronto, who gave him unguarded looks at everything that came in, you've got Burns banging him in and somebody standing right in front of Bobrovsky every time he moves.
And I think that just from a volume perspective as well, the thing that we know about Bobrovsky is like he can occasionally put up those 45 save shutouts or whatever, but like if they're doing that every game to him, even if they aren't all good quality, he also, as much as he has a reputation of occasionally doing that kind of thing, he also has a well-earned reputation of completely shitting the bed in the playoffs.
He gave up terrible rebounds in that Toronto series, and there was no one to pick him up.
Yeah. I think that at some point in time that this miraculous Bobrovsky run is going to falter. They're going to go back to Alex Lyon, and that's going to go terrible, and that's probably going to be.
I think the other thing is the other big difference too is the first time that Radko Gudas decides to try to run somebody over, and Brent Burns just runs headfirst into him. The message will be sent: you cannot do this. And I just get the feeling that team is just like Gudas intimidated and scared Leafs players, right? They were getting hit and they were just not doing anything back. And I just feel like the first time that Gudas tries somebody on Carolina is going to send a message back of nah. And if he can't get over the top of them mentally, I think the other thing then is that they can turn Gudas around a little bit. Because
I mean, look, obviously there's a lot of shit stirrers on Florida. I'm not sure that that's going to work against Carolina.
No, I just think they're too tough. So I think we're looking at Carolina and Dallas is what I'm tipping. And look,
how many games do you think Carolina and Florida? I'm thinking Carolina in 6 because I think that Florida have it in them to win a few.
Look, the benefit for Florida is Florida can win games where they don't have the puck, and they're not going to have the puck against Carolina. No. Probably. Look, again, I think it's a 5 or 6. This one, I'm more likely to go 6 than 5. But no, I'm going to be consistent. I'm going to say 5 for both because I just feel like Carolina. I also feel like if Florida can't crack Carolina early, I feel like that just might be it. I think they've got it. They've got to really crack Carolina early and get them off balance and keep them off balance. Because if Carolina settle into the groove and just become that rolling machine, it's over. So I think we're looking at Carolina versus Dallas. And by the way, for people who are worried about how that's going to look, that would be an outstanding final.
Yeah.
Like that'd be a really good game.
Yeah, I mean, like I think obviously as much as these aren't the teams that everyone picked to be in the finals, I think that we've ended up with some really kind of interesting new faces. I'm really excited to see some of these guys get some time on the world stage on that biggest kind of stage, and people that are maybe a little bit, underappreciated, like, Jason Robinson, like Sebastian Aho, like Mark Stone, will get a little bit of, extra, and look, this, coming out party for Matthew Tkachuk from from an impact perspective and stuff. Like it's an exciting playoff so far. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, I think it's going to be really fascinating. Whatever happens, I think it's going to be fascinating. So that'll do us for tonight. Thank you, everyone who joined us live. Thank you if you've listened to us on either a podcast or come and seen us on YouTube or catch us on Twitch or catch us, anywhere, wherever you want to be. We're like American Express. So anyway, that'll do us for this. We'll be back to preview the Stanley Cup final. I know, we're almost there. But this has sort of been it. We'll see what happens in the next couple of days. I think we're going to have some big news anyway breaking, and we'll catch you all later.